All right, chapter 37. Here's a captive heart busted. Making them pens was a distressed, tough job, and so was the saw. And Jim allowed the inscription was going to be the toughest of all. That's the one which the prisoner has to scrabble on the wall, but he had to have it. Tom said he got to. There weren't no case of a state prisoner not scribbling his inscription to leave behind in his coat of arms. Look at Lady Jane Grey, he says. Look at Guilford Dudley. Look at old Northumberland. Why, Huck? Suppose it is considerable trouble. What are you going to do? How are you going to get around it? Jim's got to do his inscription and coat of arms. They all do. Jim says, why, Marth Tom? I ain't got no coat of arms. I ain't got nothing but this year old shirt, and you knows I got to keep the journal on that. Oh, you don't understand, Jim. A coat of arms is very different. Well, I says, Jim's right anyway when he says he ain't got no coat of arms because he ain't. I reckon I know that, Tom says, but you bet he'll have one before he goes out of this because he's going out right, and there ain't going to be no flaws in his record. So whilst me and Jim filed away at the pens on a brickbat apiece, Jim making his'n out of the brass and I making mine out of the spoon, Tom set to work to think out the coat of arms. By and by he said he'd struck so many good ones he didn't hardly know which to take, but there was one which he reckoned he'd decide on. He says on the Scucheon, Sutcheon, will have a bend, or in the dexter base a saltire Murray in the fess with the dog couchant, Couchant, for common charge, and under his boot a chain embattled for slavery with a chevron vert and a chief engrailed, and 3 invected lines on a field azure with the nombril points rampant on a dancent indented crest, and a runaway slave, Sable, with his bundle over his shoulder on a bar sinister, and a couple of ghouls for supporters, which is you and me motto, Maggior fretta, minor atto. Got it out of a book, means the more haste, the less speed. Gee willikins, I says, but what does the rest of it mean? We ain't got no time to bother over that, he says. We got to dig in like all get out. Well, anyway, I says, what's some of it? What's a fess? A fess is, you don't need to know what a fess is. I'll show him how to make it when he gets to it. Shucks, Tom, I says, I think you might tell a person. What's a bar sinister? Oh, I don't know, but he's got to have it. All the nobility does. That was just his way. If it didn't suit him to explain a thing to you, he wouldn't do it. You might pump at him a week. It wouldn't make no difference. He got all that coat of arms business fixed, so now he started in to finish up the rest of that part of the work, which was to plan out a mournful inscription, said Jim. Got to have one like they all done. He made up a lot and wrote them out on paper and read them off. So, number 1, here a captive heart busted. 2, here a poor prisoner forsook by the world and friends fretted his sorrowful life. 3, here a lonely heart broke and a worn spirit went to its rest after 37 years of solitary captivity. Here, homeless and friendless, after 37 years of bitter captivity, perished a noble stranger, natural son of Louis XIV. Tom's voice trembled whilst he was reading them, and he most broke down. When he got done, he couldn't no way make up his mind which one for Jim to scrabble onto the wall. They was all so good, but at last he would let him scribble them all on. Jim said it would take him a year to scrabble such a lot of truck onto the logs with the nail, and he didn't know how to make letters besides, but Tom said he would block them out for him, and then he wouldn't have nothing to do but just follow the lines. And pretty soon he says, come to think, the logs ain't a-going to do. They don't have log walls in the dungeon. We got to dig the inscriptions into a rock. We'll fetch a rock. Jim said the rock was worse than the logs. He said it would take him such a prison long time. It would take him such a pison, P-I-S-O-N, long time to dig them into a rock. He wouldn't ever get out. But Tom said he would let me help him do it. Then he took a look to see how me and Jim was getting along with the pens. It was most pesky, tedious, hard work and slow, and didn't give my hands no show to get well of the sores, and we didn't seem to make no headway hardly. So Tom says, I know how to fix it. We got to have a rock for the coat of arms and mournful inscriptions, and we can kill 2 birds with that same rock. There's a gaudy big grindstone down at the mill, and we'll smouch it, S-M-O-U-C-H, and carve the things on it and file out the pins and the saw on it too. It weren't no slouch of an idea, and it weren't no slouch of a grindstone nother. But we allowed we'd tackle it. It weren't quite midnight yet, so we cleared out for the mill. Leaving Jim at work, we slouched the grindstone and set out to roll her home, but it was a most nation tough job. Sometimes do what we couldn't keep her from falling over. And she come mighty near, mashing us every time. Tom said she was going to get one of us, sure, but before we got through, we got her halfway and then we was plumb played out and most drowned with sweat. We see it weren't no use. We got to go and fetch Jim. So he raised up his bed and slid the chain off of the bed leg and wrapped it around and around his neck. And we crawled out through our hole and down there. And Jim and me laid into that grindstone and walked her along like nothing. And Tom superintended. He could out-superintend any boy I ever see. He knowed how to do everything. Our hole was pretty big, but it weren't big enough to get the grindstone through. But Jim, he took the pick and soon made it big enough. Then Tom marked out them things on it with a nail and set Jim to work on them with a nail for a chisel and an iron bolt from the rubbish into the lean-to for a hammer, and told him to work a lean-to. You hear that a lot, lean-to, Lean-to. I don't know if it's like a beam holding up the wall. Chisel and an iron bolt from the rubbish and the lean-to for a hammer, and told him to work till the rest of his candle quit on him, and then he could go to bed and hide the grindstone under his straw tick and sleep on it. Straw tick. It's two words, like straw and then tick, T-I-C-K. I don't know. Is it like something you put, like, I don't know, you put your shoes on or something? Then we helped him fix his chain back on the bed leg and was ready for bed ourselves, but Tom thought of something and says, "You got any spiders in your gym?" "No, sir, thank to goodness I ain't, Marth Tom." "All right, we'll get you one. But bless you, honey, I don't want none. I's afraid of them. I just as soon have rattlesnakes around." Tom thought a minute or two and says, "It's a good idea, and I reckon it'd be done. It must have been done. It stands to reason. Yes, it's a prime good idea. Where could you keep it?" "Keep what, Marth Tom?" "Why, a rattlesnake. The goodness gracious alive, Marth Tom. Why, if they was a rattlesnake to come in here, I'd take and bust right out through that log wall. I would, with my head." "Why, Jim, you wouldn't be afraid of it after a little. You could tame it. Yes, easy enough. Every animal is grateful for kindness and petting, and they wouldn't think of hurting a person that pets them. Any book would tell you that. You try, that's all I ask. Just try for 2 or 3 days. Why, you can get him so in a little while that he'll love you and sleep with you and won't stay away from you a minute. And will let you wrap him around your neck and put his head in your mouth." "Please, Marth Tom, don't talk so. I can't stand it. He let me shove his head in my mouth for a favor, ain't it? I lay he'd wait a powerful long time before I asked him, and more'n that, I don't want him to sleep with me. Jim, don't act so foolish. A prisoner got to have some kind of a dumb pet, and if a rattlesnake ain't ever been tried, why, there's more glory to be gained in your being the first to ever try it than any other way you could ever think of to save your life. Why, Marth Tom, I don't want no such glory. Snake take and bite Jim's chin off. Then what is the glory? No, sir. I don't want no such doings. Blame it, can't you try? I only want you to try. You need to keep it up if it don't work. But the trouble all done if the snake bite me while I's a-trying him, Marth Tom. I's willing to tackle most anything at any unreasonable. But if you and Huck fetches a rattlesnake in here for me to tame, I's going to leave, that's sure. Well, then let it go. If you're so bullheaded about it, we can get you some garter snakes, and you could tie some buttons on their tails and let on the rattlesnakes, and I reckon that'll have to do. I can stand them, Marth Tom, but blame if I couldn't get along with 'em, I tell you that. I never know before 'twas so much bother and trouble to be a prisoner. Well, it always is when it's done right. You got any rats around here?" "No, sir, I ain't seen none." "Well, we'll get you some rats." "Why, Marth Tom, I don't want no rats. They's the dad blamest creatures to disturb a body and rustle round over him and bite his feet, and when he's trying to sleep, I ever see. No, sir, give me garter snakes if I got to have 'em, but don't give me no rats. I ain't got no use for 'em. Scarcely. But it says scarcely, Skasely. But Jim, you got to have 'em. They all do. So don't make no more fuss about it. Prisoners ain't never without rats. There ain't no instance of it. And they train them and pet them and learn them tricks, and they get to be as sociable as flies, but you got to play music to them. You got anything to play music on? I ain't got nothing but a comb and a piece of paper and a juice harp, but I reckon they wouldn't take no stock in a juice harp. Yes, they would. They don't care what kind of music 'tis. A juice harp, plenty good enough for a rat. All animals like music. In a prison, they they dote on it, especially painful music, and you can't get no other kind out of a Jew's harp. It's always interesting. They come out to see what's the matter with you. Yes, you're all right. You're fixed very well. You want to sit on your bed nights before you go to sleep and early in the morning and play your Jew's harp. Play. The last link is broken. That's the thing that'll scoop a rat quicker than anything else. And when you've played about 2 minutes, you'll see all the rats and the snakes and spiders and things begin to feel worried about you and come, and they'll just fairly swarm over you and have a noble good time. Yes, they will, I reckon, Marth Tom. But what kind of time is Jim having? Blessed if I can see the point, but I'll do it if I got to. I reckon I better keep the animals satisfied and not have no trouble in the house. Tom waited to think it over to see if there wasn't nothing else, and pretty soon he says, oh, there's one thing I forgot. Could you raise a flower here, do you reckon? I don't know, but maybe I could, Marth Tom, but it's tolerable dark in here, and I ain't got no use for no flower nohow, and she'd be a powerful sight of trouble. Well, you try it anyway. Some other prisoners has done it. One of them big cat-tailing looking mullein stalks will grow in here, Marth Tom, I reckon, but she wouldn't be worth half the trouble she'd cost. Don't you believe it? We'll fetch you a little one and you plant it in the corner over there and raise it, and don't call it mullein, call it pitiola. That's its right name when it's in a prison, and you want to water it with your tears. Why, I got plenty spring water, Marth Tom. You don't want spring water, you want to water it with your tears. It's the way they always do. Why, Marth Tom? I lay I can raise one them mullein stalks twice with spring water, whilst another man's starting one with tears. That ain't the idea. You gotta do it with tears. She'll die on my hands, Marth Tom. She surely will, case I don't scarcely ever cry. So Tom was stumped, but he studied it over and then said Jim would have to worry along the best he could with an onion. So Tom was stumped, but he studied it over, and then Jim said would have, and then said Jim. Also, Tom saying this. So Tom was stumped, but he studied it over, and then said Jim would have to worry along the best he could with an onion. He promised he would go to the servant cabins and drop one private in Jim's coffee pot in the morning. Jim said he would just as soon have tobacco in his coffee, and found so much fault with it, and with the work and bother of raising the mullein and Jews harping the rats and petting and flattering of the snakes and spiders and things, on top of all the other work he had to do on pens and inscriptions and journals and things, which made it more trouble and more worry and responsibility to be a prisoner than anything he ever undertook, that Tom most lost all patience with him and said he would just load it down with more gaudier chances than a prisoner ever had in the world to make a name for himself. Yet he didn't know enough to appreciate them, and they were just about wasted on him. So Jimmy was sorry and said he wouldn't behave so no more, and then me and Tom shoved for bed. So is that Tom making him feel bad? So he see all these journals, which made him more trouble and worry and responsibility to be a prisoner than anything he ever undertook. That Tom most lost all patience with him and said he would just load it down with more gaudier chances than a prisoner ever had in the world to make a name for himself. Yet he didn't know enough to appreciate them, and they was just about wasted on him. Yeah, so Tom's making him feel like shit. So Jim was sorry and said he wouldn't behave so no more. And then me and Tom shoved for bed. All right, that was the end of chapter 38. Damn, end of chapter 38. Got 30 pages. We're not too far off. We're not too far off, baby. Let's go.